You were told you need a purpose, that without one, you'll drift, become aimless, depressed, broken. But let's get honest for a second. Have you ever wondered why the word purpose is always followed by pressure? Why the minute you find your so-called calling, you're expected to devote yourself to it like a monk or a soldier? Why does purpose always seem to come with sacrifice, discipline, and self-neglect dressed up as nobility? Here's the unsettling truth. Purpose, as it's sold today, is not freedom, it's containment. It's the prettiest version of captivity. You've been trained to think a purposeless life is wasted. But what if needing a purpose is exactly what keeps you trapped? What if the craving for meaning is not the cure, but the leash? Let's break this open. If that thought made your stomach twist, good. Stick around. Like, subscribe, and share this with someone who's tired of chasing dreams that feel more like cages. We're about to unravel the dark psychology behind the purpose myth and what's really underneath it. Society loves to dangle meaning like a carrot. Your job should be meaningful. Your suffering should be meaningful. Even your trauma should serve a purpose. You're not allowed to just be, you have to become. But becoming always bends in one direction: usefulness, productivity, value to others, value to a system. Think about how early it starts. Kids are asked what they want to be when they grow up. Not who, not how they want to live, just what job title will justify their existence. That's not guidance, that's conditioning. You're trained to self-identify through output. Purpose becomes the mask you wear so society doesn't panic at your presence. But here's the thing. A life centered on purpose is rarely about you. It's about who you can serve, impress, or sacrifice for. It's how people get stuck in marriages they hate, careers that drain them, ideologies that shrink them, because those things gave them meaning once. And walking away from meaning feels like walking into death, so they stay. Purpose becomes the prison they decorated with quotes and discipline and hustle. And from the outside, it looks noble. But from the inside, it's just obedience in a prettier uniform. Let's go deeper. Most people don't chase purpose, they chase permission. If something gives them a sense of purpose, it also gives them a reason to exist, a justification. It says, you're allowed to take up space because you're serving something. Now read that again. You've tied your right to exist to your usefulness. That's not a life. That's indentured servitude to a story you didn't write. And the more noble your purpose feels, the more invisible the slavery becomes. Martyrs aren't rebels. They're just obedient people with better branding. This is the trick. Purpose doesn't set you free. It tames you. It says, here, wear this mission like a muzzle. Now you have meaning. Now people will love you. Now you'll matter. But love based on sacrifice is not love. Meaning based on servitude is not freedom. And identity built on obligation will collapse the moment your usefulness disappears. Ever notice how people who lose their job or retire or get divorced often spiral? It's not just the grief, it's the identity collapse. They didn't just lose a title, they lost the permission to exist, because the thing that gave them, quote, purpose is gone. And without it, they have no idea who they are. Ask yourself, who are you without something to work for, or prove, or build? If you had no role, no label, no purpose, would you still feel real? Most people wouldn't, because they were never taught how to build a self, only how to perform one. That's why purpose is so seductive. It gives you a script, a structure, a mask. And masks are comforting, especially when you've never been shown your own face. But here's the price. You have to forget yourself to wear it. That's the exchange. You silence the parts of you that don't align with the mission. You become efficient, disciplined, focused, but hollow. Because you're not being, you're delivering. And the world claps. It gives you likes, promotions, compliments like you're so dedicated, so driven. But nobody asks, are you still there underneath it all? Because most of them aren't either. Look around. This is a culture of burnout wrapped in motivation posters. People push themselves to exhaustion for dreams they didn't design. They call it purpose, but really it's pre-approved identity, a factory setting for the soul. Now don't get this twisted. Meaning isn't bad, but meaning manufactured by systems that benefit from your self-sacrifice is dangerous. You're not chasing purpose, you're being given one. And if you never stop to question it, it becomes your leash. The real problem isn't that people are lost without purpose. It's that most people never had a self strong enough to survive without it. And that fragility makes them easy to guide, easy to sell to, easy to govern. So the machine keeps whispering, find your why, serve your purpose, be useful, matter. Because the minute you stop needing that narrative, you stop being manageable. And they can't have that.
You've heard it 1,000 times. Find something worth suffering for. It sounds noble, almost spiritual, as if pain is just the entrance fee to a meaningful life. But here's what nobody tells you. When you romanticize struggle, you start measuring your worth by how much you can endure, not how much you can feel, not how deeply you can live, just how well you can tolerate pain in the name of purpose. And the more it hurts, the more real it feels. Let that sink in. Because what this really means is you've been conditioned to trust pain more than peace. You don't believe rest is honest. You don't trust ease unless it's earned. And you don't let yourself feel joy unless it's been purchased through suffering. It's not that you love struggle. It's that you don't feel legitimate without it. And that's the setup. They don't have to chain you to the factory floor anymore. You'll do it yourself, as long as someone calls it your dream. Look at the culture we've built around work. Startup founders wearing burnout like a badge. Artists who feel guilty unless their creation came from agony. Parents who believe their only value is how much they give up for their children. The message is always the same. If it doesn't hurt, it doesn't count. But here's the twist. That struggle, that suffering you're told to lean into, it rarely leads to liberation. It leads to deeper investment in the thing that's killing you. Because once you've sacrificed for something, you need it to be worth it. You double down. You ignore the red flags. You call your self-abandonment loyalty. That's not purpose. That's trauma bonding, and it works. Because humans are meaning-making machines. When something hurts, we have to tell ourselves it's part of some bigger story. Otherwise, we feel foolish, lost, betrayed. So you invent a story where the pain is sacred, where the suffering is a gift, where the sleepless nights and panic attacks and slow erosion of your inner world are all signs that you're on the right track. Because if you stopped to admit the truth, that you've been dissolving yourself in the name of something hollow, you might fall apart. And that's terrifying. So you keep going, keep suffering, keep telling yourself you're almost there. This is how purpose becomes a psychological trap. You tie your identity to endurance.
your value to effort, and your entire future to a fantasy that demands your present. The harder it gets, the more invested you become, because you think that means you're growing. But all you're growing into is someone who doesn't notice they're bleeding anymore. It's not just individuals either. Whole systems are built on this. Religions that glorify poverty, nations that praise self-sacrifice for the greater good, companies that manipulate employees into thinking late nights and burnout mean they're part of a mission. You're not a person anymore. You're a vessel, a tool. And if you break down, they'll replace you and call it progress. But they'll still tell the next person that their suffering is meaningful, that it's part of the journey, that they should be grateful for the opportunity to struggle. Here's what that does to your mind. You start to reject ease. You feel guilty when things are going well. You sabotage peace because it doesn't feel real enough. You don't rest. You collapse. And when someone offers you a gentler life, you flinch, because somewhere deep down, you don't believe you're allowed to feel good without earning it through pain. This is how purpose becomes a parasite. It convinces you to kill off every part of yourself that isn't contributing to the mission. You stop singing. You stop resting. You stop dreaming sideways. Anything that doesn't directly serve your goal feels indulgent, irrelevant, wasteful. But the real waste is who you could have become if you weren't constantly proving your value through pain. And let's be honest, this isn't about strength, it's about survival. Most people clinging to purpose are just trying to stay upright, to give their exhaustion a narrative, to make their fears sound noble. Because the moment they stop moving, it all hits. The grief, the confusion, the hollowness under all that striving. So they keep going, not because they believe in the mission anymore, but because the alternative, feeling everything they've suppressed, is too terrifying to face. This is why the glorification of purpose is so effective. It weaponizes your deepest human instincts, your need to matter, your fear of being forgotten, your belief that pain must mean something, and it turns those instincts against you. It makes you your own captor, your own whip, your own prison guard, all in the name of becoming someone. But you already are someone. Even if you stop producing, even if you let go of the hustle, even if you quit the thing that was supposed to make your life count, you don't need to suffer to justify being alive. Here's the hardest pill. Most of the things you've called growth were just highly decorated forms of self-abandonment. And most of what you've called purpose was just a prettier name for obedience. Let that burn a little. Because on the other side of that burn is a quieter, truer kind of clarity. One where you no longer need to earn your peace. One where your value isn't tied to how much you're willing to hurt. One where you don't need a reason to rest or laugh or simply exist. You don't need to prove your worth by how much of yourself you can sacrifice. You just have to stop confusing pain with purpose.
Let's get brutal. Your hunger for purpose makes you easy to control. That ache you feel for meaning, for a direction, for something bigger than yourself, yeah, it's the same ache that corporations, governments, religions, and ideologies exploit every single day to turn you into a tool. Because once you believe that your life only matters if it's in service to something, you become obedient, not just to a job, to a narrative. And narratives are easier to steer than people. Think about it. When a company tells you they're changing the world with software or sneakers or smoothies, you're more likely to overwork. When a government tells you to sacrifice your freedoms for the greater good, you'll sign the dotted line.
When a religion tells you to deny your desires in exchange for salvation, you'll smile while starving. Because if you believe it gives you purpose, you'll tolerate almost anything. The worst forms of control don't come from chains. They come from meaning. It's why every oppressive regime has a unifying story. Why every authoritarian movement talks about destiny, mission, calling, greatness. Control isn't imposed. It's offered, wrapped in the language of belonging and purpose. And most people accept it because the alternative, being directionless, identityless, and alone, feels unbearable. So you pick a tribe, you take the oath, you wear the uniform, whether it's corporate or cultural or spiritual, and you call it identity, but it's not. It's borrowed purpose with a logo stamped on it. Let's go deeper. Purpose in modern society is marketed like a drug. Every brand has a mission. Every influencer has a cause. Every movement has a mantra. And you're just the believer, the buyer, the vessel. Your attention, your labor, your loyalty, they're all up for grabs. All they need is to whisper the right story into your loneliness. The most efficient systems don't fight your rebellion. They redirect it. They tell you your rage is righteous as long as it's channeled into their purpose. They tell you you're a leader as long as you follow their values. They let you feel powerful as long as you don't question the narrative itself. That's not liberation. That's psychological farming. They don't need you to think, they just need you to believe. Let's be clear. Belief is easier to control than thought. Emotion is easier to manipulate than reason. So when you build your entire identity around a cause, especially one you didn't invent, you become vulnerable, not just to being exploited, but to being erased. Because the second your values diverge from the mission, you're no longer welcome. The moment you question the dogma, you become the enemy. And suddenly all that purpose you built your life around turns on you. This is how people get consumed. They give their best years to causes that don't care about them. They contort themselves into symbols. They silence doubts to stay useful. Until one day they wake up realizing they were never loved, just leveraged. And the scariest part? They volunteered. That's how seductive purpose is. It doesn't force you, it inspires you. It gives you a badge, a role, a reason. It strokes your ego while draining your soul. It tells you, you matter now, and you believe it. So you work harder. You sacrifice more. You build someone else's empire with your bare hands and call it a calling. Now pause. Ask yourself, have you ever stopped to define your own meaning? Or did you just adopt one that sounded noble? Did you choose your purpose? Or did someone sell it to you during a vulnerable moment? Was it born from your soul or marketed to your insecurity? Most people have no idea because most people are terrified of being aimless. In a world that worships direction, I don't know sounds like failure. But here's the paradox. The more urgently you need direction, the less likely you are to notice when it's steering you off a cliff. It's easy to see this in others. The workaholic who destroys their body for impact, the activist who can't tolerate nuance, the devout follower who suppresses every instinct to stay aligned with the group. They don't seem free. They seem possessed. And in a way they are, possessed by a narrative, by the story they need to be true. Because without it, what will be left? That's the real fear, isn't it? That if you let go of your purpose, you'll dissolve, disappear, mean nothing. And the system relies on that fear. It doesn't need to punish you. It just needs you to need it. Because the person who needs purpose to feel real will never walk away. Even if the job turns toxic, even if the movement loses its soul, even if the marriage becomes a cage. As long as it gives you a role to play, a mission to serve, a title to cling to, you'll stay and call it loyalty. But here's the truth under the truth. Anything that asks you to sacrifice your inner voice, your capacity for contradiction, the right to change your mind, isn't a purpose. It's a program, and you were never meant to be programmable. So next time someone says, find your why, pause, ask, whose voice is that? And more importantly, what part of me is being silenced to follow it? Because meaning that demands your obedience isn't meaning. It's control dressed up in inspiration. And you deserve better than that.
What happens when the mission ends? When the company collapses? When the kids leave home? When the cause dies? When the person you built your life around walks away? What happens when the thing that gave you purpose disappears? Most people fall apart, not because the thing is gone, but because they don't know who they are without it. And that's the real danger. Not losing purpose, but realizing you never built the self outside of it. Let's stop pretending that purpose is always noble. Often it's just a socially acceptable addiction, a high you ride to distract yourself from how hollow you feel underneath. It fills the silence. It gives you somewhere to point your anxiety. It tells you you're needed. But the moment it's gone, you're exposed. And what's left? Let's look at the post-retirement crisis. People who spent 40 years in a job, dreaming of rest. And then the day comes, and it feels like death. They don't know how to be still. They don't know how to be unproductive. They don't know how to exist without a task. Why? Because the job wasn't just a job. It was their identity, their rhythm, their justification for being alive. And when that goes, they panic. They weren't just clocking in and out. They were building a psychological life raft to float above the abyss of meaninglessness. But the raft was made of paper, and the moment the tide shifted, it dissolved. Now zoom out. This happens in relationships. People define themselves through love, devotion, sacrifice. They become the provider, the caregiver, the fixer. And when the relationship ends, so does their sense of self. They don't just lose a partner, they lose the role that made them feel worthy. And they're left staring into a mirror they don't recognize. Because who are you really when no one needs you? This is the fragility that comes from tying your identity to a role, to a mission, to a title. It makes you dependent on external structure to feel internal stability. And the minute that structure shakes, so do you. You start chasing replacements, new jobs, new goals, new relationships, not because you want them, but because the silence is unbearable. You're not pursuing joy. You're avoiding collapse. And every new purpose you latch onto is just another patch over the existential leak you refuse to face. But what if you stopped patching? What if you let the collapse happen? What if instead of scrambling to find a new role, you sat in the raw question, who am I without something to prove? Most people don't want to find out, because what they'll see first is the grief, the rage, the loneliness, the truth that they've been performing so long they forgot what it feels like to just be. But you have to go through that. Otherwise, you'll keep mistaking performance for presence, obligation for love, achievement for worth. This is the crack in the system. When a person no longer needs a title to feel real, they become dangerous. You can't sell them their value anymore. You can't shame them into producing. You can't dangle a carrot when they've stopped running. And that's terrifying for the world that relies on your obedience. So instead, they feed you the myth of finding yourself through service. They'll say, give more, be more, do more, lose yourself in something greater. And it sounds holy, but it's just another way to disappear. Because here's what they won't say. You can build a self that isn't tied to usefulness, that isn't defined by contribution, that doesn't need a mission to be valid. You can build a self that exists for its own sake, not to fix, not to save, not to serve. just to exist. And that self, that's the part they can't control. It's the part that won't martyr itself for a cause, that won't collapse when a role ends, that won't chase meaning like a drug, because it's not hungry for permission anymore. It doesn't need a banner to wave or a hill to die on. It's rooted, quiet, unshakable. But to find that self, you have to lose the one you built for applause. You have to let the masks fall. You have to endure the silence. You have to confront the void where your role used to be. And yes, it'll feel like death, but it's not. It's birth. Because on the other side of that unraveling is something you've never truly touched. You. Unbranded, unbought, unassigned. Most people never get there. They stay loyal to their cages. They fear the unknown more than they resent their exhaustion. But you're here, reading this, which means some part of you is ready, not for a new purpose, but for a new self. Not one who lives to be needed, but one who simply lives. And from there, you don't need meaning to move. You move because you're alive. That's enough.
Let's sit with a radical idea. You don't need to be useful to be real. You don't need to contribute to be complete. You don't need to justify your life with goals, missions, or impact. You can exist without explaining yourself. And here's the thing. Until you can do that, you're not actually free. So let's rebuild. Not a better version of the role you were playing, but a deeper version of you, the one who exists even when no one is watching, the one who doesn't need to be productive, relevant, or exceptional to feel legitimate. This version of you doesn't begin with action. It begins with absence. Absence of effort. Absence of striving. Absence of the compulsive need to earn your own existence. At first, it feels like nothingness. But stay in it long enough, and you'll start to hear the signal under the noise. The part of you that isn't built from roles, titles, tasks, or expectations. The part of you that doesn't need to impress, achieve, or perform. The part that simply is, and that's where your real life begins. Not the life someone handed you. Not the script you were taught to follow. Not the dream you were sold by a culture obsessed with purpose, but your actual self. The one who feels most alive when they're not chasing anything. Most people will never find this place. They'll stay addicted to motion. They'll stay busy so they never have to feel still. They'll call their exhaustion passion, their breakdowns growth, their emotional absence focus. They'll cling to meaning like a life raft, never realizing they're floating away from themselves. But you don't have to. You can stop. You can be still. You can choose to be a person before you're a purpose. And from that stillness, something strange will happen. Not immediately, not loudly, but steadily. A new sense of self will begin to surface. Not one built to please, not one shaped by sacrifice, but one rooted in presence. You won't need a why to breathe. You won't need applause to feel valuable. You won't need to call your pain a gift just to make it bearable. You'll start to do things because they're honest, not because they're strategic. You'll rest without guilt. You'll laugh without needing to earn it. You'll help others without needing to be seen as noble. And the world won't know what to do with you. Because it knows how to handle ambition. It knows how to handle performance. But it does not know how to do with someone who no longer needs its validation. You'll confuse people. They'll ask, "What's your goal? What are you working on?" "What are you building?" And you'll smile. Because you'll know that the only thing worth building was never a brand or a business or a legacy. It was a self. Not a self that wins, not a self that performs, a self that feels, a self that's aware, a self that doesn't need a scoreboard to feel alive. That kind of self is rare because it can't be mass-produced. It's not marketable. It doesn't monetize well. It doesn't scale. And that's exactly why it's dangerous, because it can't be controlled. This is the secret most purpose gurus won't tell you. The real point isn't to be driven, it's to be free. And freedom has nothing to do with doing more. It has everything to do with not needing to do anything to feel whole. So let's strip it all away. Your title, your goals, your carefully crafted self-image. Who's left? If that question terrifies you, you're not broken. You're on the brink of something honest. Because once you stop trying to be someone, you can finally start becoming yourself. Not in a grand, dramatic, reinvent your life kind of way, but in a quiet, steady, almost invisible way, like breath, like still water, like presence. You start noticing what nourishes you, not what looks good on paper. You start valuing what feels real, not what sounds impressive. You move not because you need to prove something, but because it feels like truth. And here's where the real twist comes in. When you stop trying to be useful, you often become more impactful than ever. But the difference is, it's not compulsive. It's not forced. It's not extracted from your soul like some emotional tax. It's natural. It's generous. It's whole. Because it's coming from a place that doesn't need to be seen. It's not performance, it's presence. And presence is the one thing this world can't mass-produce, monetize, or manipulate. So, of course they'll tell you to chase purpose instead. But you're not here to be used. You're not here to be optimized. You're not here to be an efficient cog in a beautifully oiled lie. You're here, and that's enough. Not enough like a slogan. Enough like no additions required. No story needed, just you. Alive, present, aware. And that's where everything real begins.
Here's what they never tell you. The moment you stop trying to be useful, you'll feel like you're dying. Not metaphorically, existentially. It's a freefall. No mission, no role, no identity badge that says, I matter because. Just silence. And most people panic. They run back to whatever made them feel important. The grind, the cause, the addiction to progress. But if you can sit in that emptiness a little longer than your ego can tolerate, something wild happens. You stop asking, what am I supposed to do with my life? And instead, start asking, who keeps telling me I need to do anything at all? You start noticing how deeply your self-worth was wired to performance, how your relationships hinged on your output, how your personality was just a costume for surviving a system that feeds on your need to matter. And in that terrifying stillness, you see the truth. You were never supposed to be a tool for someone else's world. Not a machine, not a martyr, not a mission. You were supposed to be. Not endlessly fix yourself, not prove your value, not chase a higher purpose so hard you forget to be human. Meaninglessness isn't a void. It's a doorway to a life that isn't performance, to a self that doesn't need permission. And once you stop needing a reason to be alive, they can't own you anymore.